Hi everybody, welcome to this practitioner session. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last month, but here I am, and with some hot news, which is rather good. Today's session we're going to be looking at the brand new shiny, just released this week, modern infrastructure competency that a bunch of us have been beavering away on for an embarrassingly large number of months. But anyway, it's done, it's out. We're very pleased to have got that far. So Sharon and I have been sort of lead authors on this. Sharon's out and about today, or she's on the call, but not in her usual office. We've got our rock star in today, Todd, who's going to sort of, talk to us about infrastructure, his reflections on the competency that we've built and how he thinks it might be used, and we'll see where that takes us. There's a few startup slides that we'll run through to begin with. Here's our usual agenda. We'll just give you the overview of the practitioner and maturity model stuff itself. We'll do the shout out and picture time. I'm going to need help with that because I wasn't listening when David said how to do that, and then we'll get into handing it over to Todd. For those of you like me that couldn't find the invitation a couple of times, that's because we changed it all. The entire set of practitioner sessions is now downloadable from this link. I think it'd be really good if someone could actually grab that link and post it to the chat, just to make sure. But if in doubt, it's the usual aka.ms, the or M365 short link followed by invite, and that will download all of the meetings into your calendar, after which you've got no excuse. Thank you, Emily. Just a reminder and an update, really. The whole purpose around the maturity model, we've kind of gone over many times. I'm guessing you know this by now, but a lot of it is around us trying to find ways to better use the technology within the organizations that we interact with or part of or own or whatever that relationship is. It really is a powerful tool for leading change, for designing strategy in your organizations, and for deciding where the priorities are and what kind of change you want to make. It gives us a nice benchmark so we can figure out where we are on an objective scale rather than just a subjective scale. And it gives a set of implementations of guidances, especially when used in conjunction with any of the additional documents that have been produced around this. So the artifacts today look like the right-hand side of the slide. A brand new shiny, with a shiny border, modern infrastructure competency. But we're sitting at what, 10 different competencies now? And still a few more in the background that we can start to put some focus on. Sitting alongside the competencies themselves, we have a set of supporting articles, some principles documents, and some how to elevate. The elevate documents are kind of hands-on, take the competency, do the things to make yourselves better. It'll be a bit more granular guidance on saying you're at level 200. This is some of the things you should do to get to level 300. And then there is a set of tools around how to run competency improvement workshops. So feel free to access those. These are all in the new shiny Learn environment, which I think, Emily, you just posted a link to as well. It's damn good. Right. We always say that we try and operate these meetings as a safe space. We'll do the presentation part, and then we'll turn the recordings off if anybody wants us to do so, and people can, be as open as they choose to be. I think it's really important for us to, be open, to criticise where the criticism is appropriate and constructive, and to raise ideas or concerns that we've got. And if anybody wants to get involved, we absolutely encourage that. Quick overview of the maturity model. This is one of my favourite slides, as I think I say every time. It really gives us the benchmark for what the different levels of the maturity model are. Thank you again, Emily. Level 100 is what I euphemistically call the rubbish level. Lots of organizations have things running at level 100, and you shouldn't be embarrassed, because when you start something new, frankly, you don't know what you're doing. And it's okay to get started, and then learn as you go along. The important thing is to do the learning as you go along. And so level 100 is where you start. Things are a bit ad hoc. You're a bit kind of keeping the fires out and making sure the ball's still mostly in the air. And then at some point you want to get better and start to put some process around that. But level 200 is where you start to go, right, we've documented these. We're going to try and do these things in these ways. We've got some people who are responsible for doing stuff. What we tend to see at level 200 is you said that that's going to be the case, but sometimes it's still a bit broken. Some of the documents aren't up to date. Some of the processes don't work well. Some of the people don't realise that actually when you gave them that role, they actually have to do it. And that might include me. So level 200 is you're trying hard, but it's not always working. Level 300 is you're trying hard and mostly it's working most of the time. The rubber is firmly on the road. You're accelerating away. Things are pretty good. Level 300 is a good place to be. If you need to be, I'll say that again, if you need to be great at something, you move up to level 400, where you put in some sort of heuristics, some data, some feedback loops, some learning processes to make you better than just pretty okay. And then level 500 is when you are gold standard, the best in the business. And there's all sorts of really clever things there. You're probably using automated feedback, you're using AI and machine learning, and the process just kind of runs itself and tells you what you need to do. It's very hard to break a level 500 process because it sorts itself out. So that's the progression. We've got a bunch of ways of talking about that in the description, in the intent, which I'm not going to say again. But that's the overall approach. And then what we do when we build a competency is we take those levels and we think what that mean for this particular area. So we're going to think in the session today about what does that mean? Trying to do that when we talk about modern infrastructure. I didn't put this slide together, so embarrassing going up. I know what the future things are. I think we have talked about trying to understand what 2023 is going to look like, both in terms of the stuff that we, the competency and maturity model team do, building out the rest of the competencies, but it might be quite interesting to think about what your roadmap to drive the maturity within your organisation is. Has anybody got anything else they need to say about that road mapping line item?
Just calling out that there's no December practitioners meeting. So that's going to be our January session. So starting your year off right with some roadmaps.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. Again, some more ways that you can get involved. I guess one of the biggest ways is jump onto the content, whether it's on the Learn site or directly in GitHub, and see if you can improve it. And we've got a whole process to take those pieces of feedback and wrap it back into the content. But that's a great thing to do. And if you're not familiar with GitHub, like I wasn't a year and a half ago, then there are some great tools to helping you get up to speed with that too. As Ellie said, next session is January the 17th. There's a link to that, which is the same link that we used before, i.e. it's in that download. And if you want to get more involved, the caring is a great place to start. Thank you to everybody who came along in October. I was late, but they've managed to put me in there anyway. But great to see that we've still got a community of people turning up to these sessions. And now, picture time. So who's going to do the picturey thing? Someone ready to do the screenshot, or do I need to do that? I'll try and do it. Oh,
yeah, David said you do it. Share your screen. He'll pull it out of the video.
Oh, great. Okay, terrific. So if everyone can turn their video on, and then what we normally do is try and get us into together mode. Here it comes. So let's get a few more people with their video. Great. And I like the happy smiley people that we're getting. This is terrific. And we'll give it another 20 or 30 seconds for anybody else to turn their video on and join the picture call.
So we can't see the together mode, Simon?
Yes, share your screen.
Yeah,
share
share the screen with the together mode.
That's it.
Yeah, right, even better. Right, so here we go. I would like a big smile and a wave from everybody. So I'm going to wave at the camera I'm looking at, not on my screen over there.
Everyone looks like they really want to be here. That's cool.
Yeah, how are you? Cool. Super. Right, shift back over here. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go back to traditional view. Large gallery. Great. So I don't really know why Sharon and I have got our pictures up, because actually this is going to be Todd's show today. But I wanted to just make a big shout out to Sharon and a couple of other people who are really instrumental in pulling this infrastructure document together. It's another beefy document. I was kind of shocked when we looked at it, how many different technologies Microsoft has in play which touch on infrastructure. And I guess it isn't a great surprise. Infrastructure has been at the core of all of this stuff for, well, forever. And there's just all the Azure stuff, all the hybridization stuff, and this massive legacy of on-prem type infrastructure to consider. So it's a massive competency covering all sorts of things. We'd have to be fairly compact and rigorous to get it down to the size of document it still is. And definitely Sharon was a big participant in that. But Marc joined us in the later session to get that final push. I had some input from a colleague of mine in the UK called Simon Gallagher in the early days. So it's been a really big group effort, plus input from Simon and Marc and everybody else. So great job on getting that. And I'm not an infrastructure guy, so I learned a hell of a lot. As we go through the next session, when we hand over to Todd in particular, do feel free to raise your hand if you've got a live question. Absolutely use the emojis to express your support or surprise or whatever that might be. If you've got something you want to say, jump in and let's have the conversation. That's what it's about. I just want to make the observation, because it's easy for us all to get completely caught up in the cloud these days, because it's been around a while now, this cloud thing. But cloud isn't the only game in town. There are different flavors of cloud, including public cloud, dedicated cloud, internal private clouds, and people still run boxes with tin and wires and those things. I have to go and change the switch on my surprisingly large domestic network because it's playing up, so I've got to change out a bit of kit. So that's still part of infrastructure. So we've got to make sure that it isn't just our connection via the internet or whatever into Azure. There's more cloud than just that, and certainly a lot more infrastructure just that. And it might even include your physical computing devices, phones, desktops, laptops, tablets, and other devices as well, I dare say. Right, Todd, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take us through our level 100 through 500 with any thoughts you've got and any other slides you want to go and grab from there. So let's hear it. I'm going to try and make you focus.
All right. Well, I'll start talking. That should help. So yeah, infrastructure is both an odd topic and an interesting topic to talk about in the cloud world. Like Simon said, when we were, I'm a SharePoint guy for those of you that don't know me. I see some familiar faces in the attendees and some less. When SharePoint was an on-prem product, I remember a friend of ours, Joel Olson, did a blog post a while back, or 15 years ago, about how to be a good SharePoint admin. You had to know DNS and SQL and Windows AD and all these other things in IIS. And we kind of forgot about that, but that really was, a big part of being good at this job. And so, like Simon said earlier, that doesn't change when you move to the cloud. It just moves to different technologies, Azure storage and Azure AD and things like that. So when you move from on-prem into the cloud, you have fewer responsibilities. I haven't had to change a power supply or a hard drive out of a single server in about 10 years because everything's in the cloud. That's that's Microsoft's problem. But we do have those same technologies we have to manage. So it was interesting seeing all this. There were some surprises when I read through this document, and then there were some like, oh yeah, hadn't thought about that. So this was good stuff. And I also want to say that the maturity model is an interesting thing in that Marc and Emily have obviously been championing this, and Sadie, forever. So every time I would have a conversation with them, years ago, Marc or Sadie would say, "Oh, there's just like this thing in the maturity model." I'm like, "Oh my God, not the maturity model again." And then I actually looked at it. I'm like, this is brilliant. Like, this is, so now every time I talk to customers, I'm the guy that drops the maturity model and annoys everybody. But I really think that this is a great way to look at your organization, or as a consultant, a great way for me to look at my customers or my clients' organization to figure out where they're at, not to judge them or anything like that, but to understand what solutions make the most sense for them. So, earlier they mentioned that, you shouldn't, no level is bad. And it's just understanding where you're at. And for some, places, level 300 might be, that's where you go. That's it. That's the top. And that's not bad that you're not going to 400 and 500. It just might not make sense for your organization. So I really liked this document because it explained a lot of those things. So I'll start with level 100. And if you haven't already, bring that document up that Simon referenced and that Emily linked in the chat. It is some great stuff. It is a long tome. It didn't come out until yesterday, and they're like, "Hey, Todd, we'd like you to talk about this thing." And it's 30 hours of reading, and you got to talk about it in 24 hours. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So feel free to pop that open. Level 100 is where I see a lot of our clients at, and this is where you come in. For most folks that I'm talking to these days, they're coming from on-prem, and they're sort of being forced into the cloud. They know the cloud is there. They're probably cloud curious, but they've been running an on-prem solution for years or decades, and it works, and it's mostly okay. And so they get pushed out into the cloud. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here in level 100 are what that first phase looked like. Is you're trying to figure out what your job looks like. As admins, forever, there's been a lot of fear about what does my job as an administrator look like when everything's in the cloud. It's very scary. And this document should make it very clear to everybody that there is plenty of admin and infrastructure work to do when you get in the cloud. It just changes. No more late night calls to swap out power supplies. So in level 100, it's really all reactive. You're just basically struggling to survive a little bit. So things like, every time somebody onboards, you need to figure out what that process looks like. How do you create a user? Okay, this user's created. Oh, they can't get to the SharePoint. Oh, that's right. I forgot I got to put them into this group. And how come this doesn't work? Oh, I forgot I got to do this thing. Everything is reactive because the processes aren't defined. Their machine, adding the machine to the Azure AD is not defined, all that. And that's even if their devices are being added, like that's a nice to have at this point. So now you got people accessing your corporate stuff with their phones, but you don't have any control over that. If they leave it in the back of a cab somewhere or an Uber, you can't really do anything with it. Disaster recovery is another one that people just don't think they need. A lot of folks think that once they move SharePoint or something into the cloud, backups are Microsoft's responsibility. And from an IT standpoint, I always think of backing up as sort of having two different functions. One of them is business continuity, and that's things like, if the power supply fails, does your server have a redundant power supply? Do you have a redundant server? Just keeping business going. That's one thing the backups can do. And the other one is content recovery. The CEO deleted the most important email ever, and he needs it back in 3 minutes because he's got a meeting with the board. So Microsoft owns the former. They own the business continuity piece. So they've got servers all over the globe in hundreds of undisclosed locations buried, hundreds of feet underground. That's them. They handle all of that. As long as the service is up, everything else is your responsibility. And a lot of folks moving into the cloud don't think about that. They just think that Microsoft's got it. And so in level 100, they haven't done that. They don't know what to do. And when somebody comes back with that email about the CEO, they're going to Google or Bing, Bing if they don't want to find the answer, Google if they do. So there's just a lot of reactive things like that. It's kind of scary being at level 100. The bottom one is funny, no knowledge of storage. I've absolutely been at a client where, one of the hallmarks of level 100 is everybody has access to everything. So everybody in the IT department is global admin or something similar. So anybody can add a resource group and anybody can get storage and anybody can add VMs and all that kind of stuff. And then a bill comes across and they're like, what is this $30,000 for storage? And well, that's somebody over in IT in another department that's been testing something and forgotten left a VM in Australia on, and it ran up a big bill. So this is where a lot of folks are at, and hopefully this is a very short intermediate step that you can see these things and you can kind of see the reason that these are bad. But again, this is a very, very normal step to be in. I see a lot of places at that. And the other thing, and you guys probably talk about it in your other maturity model things, you might have part of your processes in 100, part of your processes in 200. So it's not, your organization is at 100. It's, it's a big picture. And so I'm a big fan of progress, not perfection. So as you're looking through this list and as you're reading the documents and you're seeing the things, pick out some of the things that are at 100 that you think are low-hanging fruit that you can pull up to 200, or if they're mission critical and you have to have them, make those your top priorities and say, okay, user onboarding is at 100 and we onboard a lot of people and this is killing us. We're spending hours every day handling this and reacting to it. This should be our number one priority. Device management can stay at 100 for a while, but user onboarding and offboarding, we need to pull that up to 200 or 300 as soon as we can. So that's one thing I like to bring up to folks is, everybody has a limited IT department. And so picking out which things, are most important is a good thing. Unless there's any questions, Simon, let's hit slide number 2. All right, so this is interesting. I like to think of this phase as sort of the coming up for air phase. And having a chance, to kind of look around a little bit and say, okay, we've got everything here. We're living. We're able to keep the wheels on barely. How can we start, trying to get ahead of some of these things? And processes is what it's all about. And for me, processes are a double-edged sword. And anybody that's ever worked with me can attest to this. I hate processes. I love being nimble and being able to write little one-off PowerShell widgets to do all kinds of amazing things. And I hate the rigidity of processes until I need to do something and it's not documented and there's not a process for it. And then I, use words that would make sailors blush. So processes are definitely something that you want to start thinking about. Start looking at repetitive tasks and seeing what things you can do. And just, maybe, again, not get it all automated, but start thinking about those things and where you can go. Storage is a big one. This one shows up in a few places here. Knowing where things are at, knowing how things are backed up, knowing how things, how people access things is important in this area, and just kind of getting a handle on the costs and things like that. Admin access is an interesting one, and this is so tough. And this is one that I fight with clients all the time. And I think we have something on 300 about another part that I'm going to talk about with this. But especially with smaller clients and even some mid-sized clients, they really bristle at having a dedicated admin account. They really just want to log in as Todd and be able to do all of the things without any barriers in their way. And I get that. Again, there's a lot of reacting going on. And so you just, when a fire flares up, you want to be able to hit it with the extinguisher. You don't want to have to go down the hall and unlock a door and do all that. But admin access is one of the first things that I start cracking down on with clients is maybe not putting all the best practices in place right now, but starting to think about where they can go. And so a couple of things that we can do with this is, again, for all of your IT folks, have an admin account that they can use, and their regular account. So for me, my Todd account shouldn't have any access outside of what I need to get my email, go to SharePoint, all those sort of things. And the big reason for that, well, there's 2 reasons that I like. Number one is because I'm whipping around in the interface and doing things. I don't want to be logged in as an account that has elevated access and not realize it and make changes that I probably didn't need to make just because they were lit up there. So I like having that barrier when I'm logged in as just Todd, bumping up against some walls as I try to do things inside of a SharePoint site or something. The other thing is, even though I practice, safe interneting and all of that, the bad guys are out there, and boy, they have gotten bad. They've gotten really bad. And so I don't want any processes that are running as me, as Todd, having access to anything more than they have to in case some kind of ransomware or something pops on my machine. And so I want that big wall between my regular Todd account and my Todd admin account. And so go back to slide 200 for a second, Simon. And so understanding admin access, it's easier to start out with those admin accounts in place and just get people used to that. And one thing I think at this day and age, we probably all do it, but if you haven't looked at browser profiles, that is the key that makes the separate account, the user account and the admin account, that's the piece that makes all that work. A lot of folks use incognito mode or private mode or banking mode or whatever your browser has, where you can fire up an extra browser window in a different context, log in as your admin credential. Since you're both going to office.com, you can't do it in the same window. Browser profiles are like that, but better in that they're not ephemeral. So you can log in as your admin, you can bookmark admin centers, things like that. But then when you close it, they're still there. It is a separate sandbox from your regular user and all of that. So if you haven't looked at browser profiles yet, go ahead and do that. So that's one of the things I tell my admin clients when I talk to them. Set up a browser profile for your regular user. That's what you use to hit SharePoint and all that. Create a second browser profile. That's where you go to, portal.azure.com, that kind of thing. But start looking at those places. And then this one, the point down there, admin access is revoked after use. There's, like the just-in-time admin stuff. Start looking at that, adding people for things that they need, but then revoking it right away, having some kind of plan in place. I don't remember where it's at in the document, but auditing is an important bit. Auditing happens all the time inside of Azure, so know where that's at, and then know what events you're looking for so you can see when people get added to admin roles, taken out of roles, so you can have some idea about that. Also, be aware of the fact that those admin logs roll over. Microsoft doesn't keep them in perpetuity. I think right now everybody gets 90 days of those security logs. Somebody in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. And so if you plan to be around in more than 90 days, which I hope everybody does, you should start thinking about having some process in place for pulling those audit logs off into something else so you can go back. Disaster recovery, I think we talked about that. Just knowing what's being saved, what's not, and what's important, what's not. This is a good place to start. Again, you're starting to have some of the awareness. Your eyes are open. The level 100 was just, staying alive, keeping your head above water. Level 200 is, catching your breath and starting to make some positive changes. Simon, let's see, 300. There we go. All right. So this one, again, I hit the onboarding and offboarding, but that is such a big one for most clients because that happens all of the time. And knowing what that process is has many benefits. One of them is just it gets your new employee, it gives them a good first impression of your organization because they can get in, they can log in, they can get to their email, they can get to SharePoint, they can get to the things in SharePoint they need to, they can get to whatever. So having that is a good first impression. It saves you a lot of time. The other thing is having a good, solid onboarding and offboarding process just makes you a harder target for bad guys. And at Sympraxis, we did a Ask Sympraxis, our every other Wednesday talk about offboarding. And offboarding is something that people don't think a lot about. Onboarding is very obvious because you got people screaming at you when they can't get to this or they can't get to that. Offboarding is sort of, all right, we just delete their account and be done with it. There's really a lot more nuance to it than that. And so having a process around that is good. Our Ask Sympraxis from 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago was on that. I recommend going out to our YouTube channel or something and watching that. There's a lot of prescriptive guidance in there, but there's a lot of things you should think about. And so some of the things that I talk about in that one are things like, should you delete an account or should you disable the account? Why you would go down either road. If you do disable the account, do things like, disable it, flush all of the tokens out so any of the devices that are logged into that account get logged out, scramble the password so if the password's anywhere and you need to reactivate that account, the old password can't get in, things like that. Leaving accounts, not deleting them seems scary, seems like a huge security hole. But once you have a good process around it, you can sort of see why that's not a bad thing. And then it gives you, again, some ability to see what those people had, things like that. So look into that. I like the RBAC a bit, the role-based access controls. That is I would argue that, well, so I guess this one, so level 300 feels a little low for RBAC, and maybe that's gotten easier since I played with it last, but that's this ability to give people admin controls based on things other than them being added to admin groups. And that's a little complicated to manage. It's a great thing, and it definitely helps with security. But it's a high level 300. We'd call it a 350, but it's a great way, especially if you've got a big organization, keeping people's accounts safe and things like that. Software distribution and patch management is an interesting thing because there's not a lot of patches. I'm mostly a server side guy, so there's not a lot of patching to be done there. But for workstations, understanding that is important. And depending on how big your organization is, I'm the SharePoint guy, so I deal with SharePoint. There's obviously no patching there. But knowing when the product itself is going to be upgraded, so going into the admin center, looking at the updates that Microsoft sends out about what great things that Microsoft's going to turn on in SharePoint that are going to break your user's experience. Staying on top of that is important. That's an obvious thing for admins. But then also, my product, my love, SharePoint, interacts with a bunch of other products, Word and Excel and all that. So yeah, you do need to have something in place to understand how any of that changes, because there have been changes over the years that have changed that user experience. It's a change to Word that changes how they see SharePoint or get to things, or OneDrive gets updated. So understanding that, having a process for that, so when these products get updated, you can predict when the calls are going to start coming in, roll them out, things like that. Yeah, and the teams and processes, I like that. Okay, yeah. So Simon threw a thing in there on the browser profiles. I can't talk about them enough. Like, I use them, and again, as a consultant, browser profiles made my life tolerable, because obviously everybody goes to office.com. Like, every customer that our client that I need to log into and go to their SharePoint admin center, I'm going to that same place. And so one of the things about in private mode is every in private mode window shares the same sandbox. So if I'm logged in as Todd and I'm doing my Sympraxis stuff, and I have to log into a client's SharePoint admin, and I do the Control-Alt-P or Control-Alt-N or whatever it is, and I get that in private window, yep, I can log into the client's admin thing. But if I have another client that I need to jump into and I do that again, it's the same sandbox. So I've seen people doing a thing like, well, I log into my personal stuff with Chrome, I log into my work stuff with Chrome in private, I log into this with Edge, and it's just this whole matrix of ugly stuff. And so profiles make that all tolerable. So anytime I start working with a new client and I'm kind of onboarding them, 2 steps that I always do is I always create a browser profile for that client and for my information to get into that client. I always do the sync. I use Edge, and so I know that I can use my Microsoft account to sync across. So if I have to jump on anywhere else. And then the other thing I do, because I love PowerShell, is I save that credential in the Windows credential store with PowerShell. So if I ever need to use the PNP PowerShell, I don't have to type that username and password in. It is my expectation that when I onboard with a new client and they give me my credentials, I type that password maybe once, and that's when it goes into my password manager, and then I create a profile, and that's handled, and I save it in PowerShell, and that's handled, and I don't ever have to worry about it again. Phil mentions in the chat that he couldn't function without profiles. I couldn't either. Like, my Android phone has like 2 profiles, and I find doing stuff, I need my profiles. So that's an important one. The staff of teams and processes and all of that, Simon, that's a good thing. This is one of these interesting things where level 300 makes a lot of sense for medium to large size things. For small companies, knowing the teams and all that is tough because it's usually the same team. But if you're a medium to large size company, knowing which teams own what is incredibly important. And I don't think it's in here, and it might be in 400. I don't see it, but having somebody who has authority over all those teams is really important. I did a client migration for a really large company once, and I was helping migrate SharePoint. We were migrating SharePoint from on-prem to the cloud, and we were doing a bang-up job. And I don't just say that because I was on the SharePoint team, but I'm sure that was an important part. But the Exchange team was doing the same thing, from Exchange on-prem to Exchange in the cloud. They were not doing as well. They were behind. And they were having some legitimate issues. Exchange is a pretty complicated beast, but the management for the SharePoint team didn't want to get behind. He was on track. He wanted to stay on track. He wanted to be, on time, under budget, and all that. But the Exchange team being behind ended up breaking a bunch of SharePoint things because users weren't, here, or they were on-prem and then they're in the cloud. And you just got to keep those two things connected. And them getting behind and us being on time caused some problems. But what we didn't have was strong IT leadership that had meetings with those folks every week and said, okay, Exchange team, you need to figure this out, or okay, SharePoint team, you're very smart, you're whatever, but you need to slow down until. So having those teams and then having somebody who, has authority over those teams is a really great move that will keep a lot of the things in sync. So I like the intent here. Everybody knows what the processes are and why they're important. I really like that. Again, the process bit is a really terrible thing until you need to use it, and then it's the greatest thing ever. So just embrace the process and all that. All right, let's have level 400, Simon. This is so, and I guess let me say a couple things about and Simon mentioned this earlier, that 300 is sort of like the leveling off point. Like if you get to level 300, like pat yourself on the back. Like be proud of where you're at, because you are ahead of a big chunk of your peers out there, and things are probably running pretty smoothly. If you're at level 300, you can probably take a week off and not feel terrible about not checking your email all the time, because there are processes in place, so things are running pretty smoothly. And if something doesn't go well, there's other people there, they can read the processes. So 300 is a pretty great place to be. And if you're there, take a minute, enjoy it, bask in it. But then think about level 400. And this is where you really get a chance to show off your technical skills. And over the years, and I was one of these people, IT pros, admins, whatever, persona you want to talk about, they get nervous about the cloud because it feels like they're taking their job away. And level 400 and some of the earlier stuff is where I'm like, no, you just get to move up the stack. You get to do cooler things now. You don't have to worry about troubleshooting network connections or, going in to reboot a switch or something. That's somebody else's problem now. Now you get to take those skills and do cooler things. And this is one of those things. Level 400 is really where you get to start doing those things. So managing infrastructure with the same rigor as code, we're getting there. That's tough stuff. And I think that's a great place to be. Simon mentioned that he didn't know what GitHub was until a year and a half ago. Like 2 years ago, GitHub and VS Code were naughty words to me. If somebody mentioned that I needed to use those, I stuck my fingers in my ears and I did the la 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 thing. That's not for admins. I don't need that stuff. But now, admin things, adding servers, creating things, that goes through review. I show it to other people. It gets put in a repository so people can see it later and we can reuse it. And that's actually kind of fun. I know I'm terrible at it, and you can't see Marc's camera right now, but Marc struggles with me all the time because my skills in keeping my code synced and shared are probably about half as good as my impression of what my skills are. But it's a good thing to start thinking about that. And your infrastructure is managed in code. One of the things that I tell folks when we move into the cloud is that the real benefit of the cloud is scale. It's great that you don't have to worry about some of the lower level things, but what really makes the cloud shine is scale. You can have a lot more SharePoint sites and not have to worry about backend storage and things like that. You can have all these things. You can scale really big, and the confines of the hardware and the infrastructure aren't there as bad. But the downside of that is once you start having more things, you scale more. You just have to script more things. You don't create VMs by hand anymore. You don't create mailboxes by hand anymore. So the line between code and infrastructure gets very blurry because you use code to create infrastructure. And it's not even just VMs. It's things like network connections inside of Azure and all of that. So once you recognize that you're doing this all with code, all your infrastructure is code, applying all those same techniques to keep that code up to date and make sure everybody's using the same version of it and all of that is incredibly important. Security. I was talking to a friend of mine. I have some non-tech friends. I don't know why they hang out with me. It's probably because they want to have somebody to call when the printer doesn't work. But I was telling this friend of mine. She was like, hey, "What do you do?" I'm like, I'm a computer nerd." She's like, "Oh yeah, that's awesome. My nephew Nate, he's a computer nerd." She's like, "Do you do security?" And I'm like, "Well, I do security with a small s. Anybody who does this job, who is a cloud admin or a computer admin, network admin, we're also security folks. You just can't not be anymore. But I'm not a big security guy. I'm not, pen testing and white hat and all that kind of stuff. But this, we always have to worry about security, and having auto remediation of these things helps us be more proactive. And it's something that we can't leave to the network folks. We have to build it into our processes. And so again, the audit logs that I mentioned that are Microsoft 365 wide, those are a great place to start pulling things from. Being ahead of these things, trying to figure out where the bad guys are going to come in and how to catch them when they come in. One of the things that I like to tell folks when I 10 years ago when we're starting to move folks from SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint Online is I'm sure your security folks are very smart, very good at their jobs, loved by one and all, but they're probably not as good as Microsoft's security folks. And one of the reasons that Microsoft security team is so good is because they have a bunch of this auto remediation built in. They can tell when there's a big password spraying attack affecting the internet, and they can get in front of it, things like that. And once you have all of your things out in the cloud, that's something that you can take advantage of. So start thinking about those things, and trying to keep your stuff safe. Content strategy is interesting because governance and compliance, like that is becoming a bigger thing. And it's because we can't put so much out into the cloud. And when I do an upgrade, or a migration and move people into the cloud, one of the things that I talk about is, you shouldn't upgrade crap. You shouldn't migrate crap from on-prem into the cloud. You shouldn't bring it up. But because the cloud scales so well, people they don't necessarily want to do that because they can put all the files in. They don't have to go through all the work of pruning things out, culling them. But with that comes a need for more governance and compliance. And so if you're going to put a lot of things in the cloud, it's easy to lose track of them. So having good compliance and governance strategies, saying documents that go here have a default tag of this, documents that go over there, having that in place can keep your data from sneaking out. This is a good thing to talk about with, your HR folks, your legal department, depending on what industry you're in or what country you're in. Your legal department might have some very, very strong opinions on this. And so being at this level 400 gives you you've got a bunch of your things automated, so you have some time to look at these, and being able to have that in place can save a lot of money. Simon Doy put in the chat about the $4 billion that Microsoft invests every year in cybersecurity. I think that's probably not enough. Netflix or Prime, I forget, has a great documentary on Stuxnet. I think it's called 0 Days. Go out and watch it. As a bunch of computer nerds, you'll love it. Stuxnet was a great thing that came through 10 or 12 years ago, malware virus. Two things I knew about it when it happened, but two things, I recently watched that documentary. Two things struck me. Number one was how crazy smart the people were and how very targeted and how well all that worked on the amazing things they did. That was the first thing struck me. And number two, they did this 12 years ago. What are bad folks doing now? And so having security and governance and compliance, it just terrifies me. So that $4 billion seems like maybe a good start. And then disaster recovery, business continuity, all that. We've talked about that, but knowing where that's at, having dedicated test environments. If you haven't done it already, go out and get a development tenant for Microsoft. Somebody will put a link in the chat about that. That is a great place to test things. I don't do anything in production until I've run it in a test environment. And that's a script for creating users, setting permissions, whatever. All of these processes that we've been defining and testing a bunch, I always do in my developer tenant first. And the great thing about the developer tenants, if you use the thing that Simon just linked, it comes full. It's got 20 some users. They've all got mailboxes and meetings and SharePoint sites and all that. So you don't spend any time building the environment and putting your test documents in. Now you can just run it through. And in the context of security or governance, you've now got documents you can play with and tag and all of that. Great thing. One of the best things that Microsoft ever did. So have one of those and then practice your disaster recovery processes. Know what SharePoint backs up and what doesn't, and when something's deleted, when can you recover it, when you not recover it. Have all that ready to go. Man, Simon, this is bittersweet, but I think I need slide 500. I think we're getting towards the end here. Take a drink. There it is. 500. I think of this. I don't know that I would ever say that I have found myself at level 500 on. 500 is like achieving nirvana. You know, it's like there is no more suffering at level 500. But this is some great stuff. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, your organization isn't 500, 300, whatever. Individual slices are. And so I think even if 500 as a whole is not attainable, there are some really great things to look at in here to start working towards. And one of my old bosses, you know, 25 years ago, made me read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I hated that. It seemed kind of schmaltzy and silly. And then I read it, and 25 years later, I'm still quoting it. So you can guess what kind of an impact it had on me. But one of the 7 habits of highly effective people is begin with the end in mind. And so the level 500, the level 400, they may not be achievable necessarily in your organization, but they should be aspirational. You should look at these things and think about, is the thing that I'm doing now putting me down the road to reaching level 400 or level 500? And the first bullet point there, having teams dedicated to making sure that things align with the business initiatives, is one of those things. And I think tomorrow's Ask Sympraxis is going to be on something like this. As a tech nerd, I find myself often really hyper-focused on cool tech and wanting to do cool things. And it's really easy to lose track of the idea that as IT, our goal is to make the business run better. We are not the end, we are the means that help them get to the end. And one of the ways that you can do that is keeping a good line of communication with your business and finding out how you can help them. And that line there for level 500, the dedicated team part is probably a 500 level piece, but having folks that are constantly aware of the business initiatives and the business users experience, I feel like that's a level 300 at the highest. That's just something that should always be there. So as you're doing your other processes and planning your business out, keeping that one as a goal, as a North Star, as the folks say, is a really good way to do it. Being proactive is a lot of these things. We've also got the MFA thing. We haven't talked about that a lot. I feel like MFA in some variety is like a level 1 or 200 thing. Microsoft has done a great job of making MFA available and done a terrible job of making MFA manageable. And I mean that because there are multiple paths to setting up MFA. There's a way you can do it in Exchange admin. There's a way you can do it in the SharePoint admin or the Office admin. There's a way you can do it in Azure. There's another way you can do it in Azure. And so having a clear MFA goal is good early on, and making sure that everybody in your teams doing everything the same way, and then moving towards more MFA or Nirvana, because there's a million knobs and dials in there that you can switch to really fine tune MFA. I think for now, MFA, if it's done well, is a pretty good deterrent against some of these bad guys. So again, MFA itself has its own maturity model. Using MFA, you want to do that. SMS texts are probably a level 100 or maybe a level 50 approach to that. And that's the idea that when you log in, you get a text and whatever. I've got a buddy that does just identity inside of Office 365. And I bounced this off of him, and he's like, they see PIN cloning or SIM cloning and all the time. He doesn't even consider that secure anymore. So, knowing you should use an app, knowing how you should use the app, knowing you should use the number matching thing, that's a piece of MFA you should get in there. And the bottom one is a great one. Just being aware of best practices that are happening and having something in place to protect you against them or to alert you when they're happening is good, helps you keep things on the rails. And then I love the DevOps, server reliability engineers submitting, doing management via pull request and getting automated results if they pass or fail. Like, that sounds lovely. I want to do that someday. That's good stuff. I'm looking at my clock and I'm almost out of time, and I could go on for hours about this, but I will spare you all that. So I think the next one, I think we can open up the floor to some questions if we have that. Throw on your mics, your cameras, and let me know what you think.
Thanks, Todd. That was great. I've got a question. What do you think is missing from the infrastructure model? What are the key things in infrastructure that we just blindsided ourselves in?
Well, so I will tell you in full honesty, I don't know that I got every word of it read because it is a pretty massive document. You covered a bunch. Like, I was really impressed with it. There was a ton of things in there that I didn't think about. So I would have loved to have been able to come in and say, I'm kind of a big deal. Here's all the stuff that I know that you guys don't, because here's what you missed. I didn't find any of those zingers. I was kind of looking for them. Hats off to the team that wrote that. It was really well done.
Thank you very much. It is comprehensive, but then look at the number of tech pieces that Microsoft alone has that deal through this. It's kind of terrifying. So this thing is going to evolve pretty quickly, I suspect, as the landscape moves forward from wherever the heck we are today.
Yeah, the only thing that I would suggest, and I already mentioned it in the Teams thing, is Marc's last name is misspelled, and it's like the very last line of the. So I did at least get to the bottom, and I kind of feel like that's one of those things, like like the brown M&M thing in Van Halen's Writers. It's a test to see if everybody read to the bottom. Like, I noticed that the last line had Marc's name misspelled, so I made it to the end.
It's been fixed, and thank you for the feedback. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. Has anybody else got any questions? Stick your hand up or just go off mic if appropriate.
Yeah, just shout out. I mentioned earlier when David was on the call that my 12-year-old daughter dared me to grow out my beard for No Shave November. So if you'd like to chime in and tell me how lush and beautiful my beard is, that's also welcome. Weird, no takers on that. I'll be.
Todd, I think it's coming along well. It's something I wanted to sort of talk about was I know we mentioned it yesterday, was that progression of IaaS to PaaS, where we think that might fit in the model.
Yeah, so that was, I wish I'd remembered to mention that. So we were talking about moving from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service. And that really is like the difference between if you've got servers on-prem, just migrating them up to VMs in the cloud, that's IaaS, or looking at that server and saying, I moved that server up. It's running SQL Server. Why am I running an operating system and all that? Why aren't I taking advantage of, Azure SQL? I feel like that's like that can't be any higher than 300. Like, that has to be, you really can't consider yourself, competent until you've looked it over. Now, some things you can't move out of IaaS. You've got custom code, things like that. But I'm actually working with another customer who's looking at doing something like that, and they're moving from SharePoint on-prem to the cloud. And they write this custom code that does all these weird things and it hooks back through and all that. And I'm like, and we've got Azure Functions, we've got Azure Runbooks, we've got like there's a bunch of ways to not write this on-prem piece, and that slide that was just up, those tool sets, that's the problem. Like the landscape. I remember when Microsoft first started pushing Azure, like there was nothing to do there. Like, you went to Azure, like now it's overwhelming. Now there's too much to do. So I think looking at every infrastructure as a service thing you've got, every VM you've got running, and say to yourself, how can I turn this VM off? What product, what platform, what service can I use to replace is a great thing, and probably shouldn't be any higher than 300.
Yeah, and I guess it could be, you know, it's part of that process when you're thinking about what you're gonna spin up. But then maybe, you know, and it's also cost optimization as well. You know, it's what's it going to cost you to total cost of ownership to run it versus you know, the cost of actually running the platform and the compute that it's using. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of different platforms from Microsoft get dinged because they're too expensive, and I've certainly cried foul on that a bunch of times. But I think it's always cheaper than running a VM and putting all that stuff yourself. So there's a reason that it costs that much. Yeah, you definitely need to look at that.
That's always the way, isn't it? You know, you never compare, you know, apples with apples. It's apples with, you know, grapefruit or something. But yeah, you know, and people don't know how much, say, their data center costs to run, you know, how much electricity it's consuming. It's you know, it's difficult to compare the two.
Yeah. Marc mentioned in the chat that a rules-based criteria is important for that whole IaaS to PaaS thing, and that's good. So yeah, we will let you keep your IaaS, but here are the reasons that are acceptable for that. And I think that's, you know, making people justify that, not just letting them take the lazy way out and say, nah, it can't be done. Really? Are you sure?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
I think we're at time. So anybody on the call, I'm on Twitter at Todd Klindt. You can find me there, LinkedIn, whatever. If you have any other questions about this, or again, just want to make happy comments about my beard, reach out to me. I'm out there.
Right. Well, I want to say a big thanks for that, Todd. You present like I do, which is, you know, you speak for 30 minutes, then you take a breath, and then you carry on. It's very impressive and somewhat reassuring. But really appreciate you coming in and giving such a comprehensive review and a supportive review of the competency we've just produced with so little notice, given how damn big the thing is. Everybody else, please, you know, as always, go out and take a look at the document, and indeed any of the other documents you might want to peruse. Make sure you give us feedback. There are multiple ways you can get involved, and here are a few of them. We will push out the slides, etc. later on. So make sure you you know, let us know what you think, or just, you know, put the updates directly in via GitHub. That's always a good thing. We'll be back not in December, as it says here, because we're going to take December off and go and drink wine and other lovely, wonderful things. And we'll see you all in January and give you an update from them. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Todd. Good job.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.